But thank you all for joining us. There we go. I am very excited about having this part two of Black History Matters. Last week was supposed to be a one-part um, event or Facebook Live, and the way you all started texting me and inboxing and DMing and reaching out, we definitely had to come back and do a part two. And so I am so appreciative to my guests who are joining me again on tonight. And we have added an additional guest. He was supposed to be on last week as well, but he was unavailable. He has two little ones and just couldn't get it together in time. And so thank you for joining us, Jamichael. We have LaQuisha Ewing. We have Carmen Davis. We have Jamichael Jordan. And we have Trinae Jordan Sr. again. And so if you want to know exactly who they are, because they have a long list of things and they have done and impact they have made on our community, I'm going to make you go back to part one and go check it out, because I want you to go watch that anyway, because it's a lot of good information on that live. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. My first question, they're logging in. Before I do that, make sure that you all are typing your comments in the comment section. Make sure you are dropping your questions in there. Like I said last week, we have some experts on here. So don't get off without asking your questions. We want you all to kind of help guide this conversation. So I will be checking it periodically. So if you see me looking down, that is why. Good evening, Miss Sandra. Let us know where you're joining us from. I see Angela Jordan, good evening. Rosetta Russell. I see Marilyn Harris. Lily Johnson, she's from Omaha, Nebraska. Denise Stewart, all the way from Kansas City, Missouri. I see Timothy Smith. He's all the way from Georgia. So we have them from everywhere. Fort Wayne, Indiana. So they are from, we got Black people from all over the country trying to hear about their history. And so let's go ahead and get started. So at the end of our discussion last week, as soon as I got off, and I wish I had seen this before when we were actually on the call, but as soon as I got off, I logged onto the internet and I saw an article where in Utah, a school in Utah sent home a form to parents to allow them to opt their children out of Black history education, out of the Black history curriculum. And it was a lot of people who caused an uproar about it, and the administration ended up reneging on the forms, but it was already out there and they were not able to opt out of the curriculum. I want to start by talking about your thoughts on that, which I'm pretty sure I could probably guess, but I want to go a little deeper. So let's talk about, and anyone can start, about your thoughts on them being able to opt out initially of the curriculum. Anyone?
I'll be the brave soul.
Thank you. All
right. So I too read this story, Dawn. I think it's important for us to take all things into context. The fact that I can't remember the city, but I do remember that it was like north of Salt Lake City, and that the racial makeup was like 94% self-identified white. And so this is a Montessori school. And if anybody knows anything about Montessori, it's self-guided learning, a lot of parent involvement. And so this would have been the first year that that they were incorporating a Black History Month theme into their curriculum. So it wasn't just like a program or one special thing. They were actually trying to adopt this into the curriculum. I think personally that until we see the history of Black people from the diaspora, that we see all Black people's history as our history as a nation, that we're going to keep running into this. There are places where there are people who have little to no racially ethnic diversity in those cities. And so they don't understand the value of what they don't understand, right? They think that, the land that they live on is based on, again, talking like we did last time, on the narrative that they've been given, not realizing that if you are in Utah, that you are on compromised land, you are on stolen land. And so, you know, despite who lives there now, the history that you're being told has been whitewashed. So they should want, you know, if I were them, I would actually, I don't even know what the curriculum looked like that they proposed, but I hope that it was a true narrative of wherever they live in Podunk, Utah.
That's good. That's good. Anybody else want to touch on that? That's a great perspective, LaQuisha, because from what you just said, a lot of people, I'm going to be honest, including myself, that I didn't even think of that perspective initially. It was kind of like, what? Here we go again, you know, when I saw that. So thank you for bringing that perspective, because I had people the next day in my inbox on Instagram that were sending me this article, and they were upset and that kind of thing. And I didn't even really respond to it. But I'm glad I did it now that I hear a whole nother perspective. And I think that that's why this live is so important, because it gives you a different perspective other than your initial thinking. Because like we said, your story is your story. What you know, your experience is your experience. And so it takes being in the environment and in the atmosphere of other people who are educated, more educated than you on a situation and on a topic, to really be able to open your perspective and learn and be open to learning. And so thank you for addressing that.
Yeah, I almost feel like they should be applauded for even taking the initiative to start, or, you know, this being their first year trying to implement that type of curriculum. And I think you just said something that's very important, that a lot of times we have to be careful of not reading headlines and then not reading the full story. And I think a lot of times we find ourselves getting very, very attached because of what we've been through to the initial shock of a headline. But we know a headline is nothing but to give us an opportunity to click on the page. But we got to make sure that we actually click and read, because a lot of things that we see going on today is simply what do you call it? Clickbait. Clickbait. Mm-hmm. And so clickbait can get you in a whole lot of trouble if you don't understand the context of what the entire story is about. So that was a good point.
I just wanted to add in that the fact that Black American history is still considered a separate history is a problem within itself. Granted, I had a whole career at an African American museum, so it might sound odd coming from me to say that, but the fact that it's just not part of the general curriculum is a problem. And, you know, there's that saying out there, I think it's Nikki Giovanni, where it's, you know, America is white and everybody else has to hyphenate. And I'm like, you know, I'm paraphrasing that. But yeah, the fact that it's just considered a separate history is problematic within itself, let alone whether or not people could opt out of learning it and all of those things. We need to get to a point where it's part of just when you learn US history, you learn all of it. It's not this separate section. It's not during Black History Month. Okay, we're going to touch on African American history now. It should be part and thread through the whole story of America, because we're in every piece. Our blood, sweat, and tears is in every piece and fabric of this country that makes up this country. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be included in every part of the story that's being told, every war that's been fought, every movement that's happened, every type of period that we've been through. Black people have been here. So we should always be included in every part of the history, not just a separate component that says, okay, now we're studying Black history.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And Keisha in the comments said, I don't agree. We can't opt out of their curriculum. So why should this be an option? If a specific topic is introduced, it should be taught. So let me ask you this question. I've heard this question many times before as well. Do you think that the history books, number one, should be rewritten? And number two, do you think that it will be done? And that it's important. I know we think it's important for it to be done, but what do you think? What does the future, because we've gone through a lot of changes here recently, a lot of changes that still must happen. I think that for me, it's not necessarily a lot of change. I think it's been a lot of exposure and a lot of conversation that has risen from the things that have been taking place. I'm not so sure if it's been so much change at this point yet. I think that we may be on a path to a lot of changes being made. So what do you all think?
I think that if you want your children to stand on the truth, then you got to teach them the truth. And we know that a lot of our our curriculum, the things that we learned in school were not true, or they were half truths. And so for us to continue to perpetuate a one-sided story, a story that is unbalanced, it does a disservice to not just our children, but to the future. And one of the things that we've all heard before is that you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. Unfortunately, a lot of the youth that I mentor, that I spend time with, they don't know their history. And the history that they do know, it's been watered down. It's been put in the books to paint a certain picture, kind of like what you guys said last week. History is always ran by the one who tells the story. And the problem is, for so long, the story has been told wrong, or it hasn't been told at all. And so we absolutely, in my opinion, have to create a curriculum that speaks truth, preferably written by someone who's actually lived it and experienced it. And I believe when you do that, you'll start to see a different type of understanding from all races.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Well, we have a comment from Denise that says people are fearful when you talk about teaching Black history because they are envisioning what they have heard about anything related to Black people. And those thoughts are formulated from what they have seen in movies and from hate stories. That is so true. People only know what they've been exposed to. And an example of that is I remember when I was in Fort Wayne, living in Fort Wayne, I had my first for real salary paid job, and I was an adult probation officer for the probation department in the county. And I remember I was working with a girl and we became pretty good friends. And got along really well, had lots of conversation, but she used to always want to feel my hair and all that kind of stuff. And I just be like, oh, here we go again. And I remember one day we were sitting in my office after one of my appointments, and she said, you know what? She said, I really like you. She said, do you know you're the first? Now, mind you, I'm out of college. I'm in my mid-20s, early 20s, mid-20s. And she said, you're the first Black person I've ever met in person. And that floored me. Like, I just could not. She had came from this little country town way out in Indiana, the cornfields. And that just really floored me because that was the first time that I have ever met anyone who admitted, or that I knew. And I had been to IU Bloomington. I had been to predominantly white schools for most of my life. And so to hear that this is the first experience you had. So I started asking her questions like, well, what do you think? Asking her different questions. And everything that she said to me was very stereotypical because all she knew was what she had heard from her family growing up and what she had seen on TV. And that just floored me. So I definitely agree with, you have to be exposed to different environments and different people and different cultures for you to be able to get your own perspective and experience with people. Because if people aren't teaching you something, you know only what you're taught. And I believe, and I'm going to stop and let somebody else jump in, but I believe that that's what's happened to a lot of our young people in our culture, that they have not been taught. And so when they're watching some of these movies and seeing some of these things portrayed and being told in school who they are not, that's why they have maybe sometimes some of the behaviors, because they don't understand who they truly are. What are your thoughts on anything that I just said a lot, but any of those things?
Well, I kind of agree with you. The bottom line, and one of the statements that I've always made as I've worked with young people for the last 30 to 40 years is, number one, you cannot be what you cannot see. But on the other hand, you will be what you see. And if people are raised in an environment and that's all they see, then they grow up hearing what they've heard, seeing what they've seen, and understanding what someone has told them. So the key is really exposure. I think, and not just with young people, but I mean, even now, as I go around and as I sit at different tables around our community, and you sit with professionals and individuals that you would think that are 50, 60, 70 years old, you would think that they would have a better understanding of someone other than themselves, and they've lived in a community and not had any contact. And so we must be intentional. We must be intentional with our relationships. We must be intentional with our conversations. And we've got to stop just observing what we like if you only do what you like, that's all you're going to know. But to grow and expand yourself, you got to get to know other things and other people, definitely other races.
That's good. That's good. Anybody else? All right. So one of the questions that came to me over the last week was about Black girl magic. Somebody asked me, what is Black girl magic? I keep hearing, because we were just talking about headlines, and a lot of times we look at headlines, we look at hashtags and comments that people are making, and people want to know, some people want to know, what is Black girl magic? And I'm going to let LaQuisha start off with that. What is Black girl magic, or what is your perspective on Black girl magic?
Did I get an opt because we lost Carmen? Because
Yes.
I was really leaning on Carmen for that question. So, and my perspective is just that it's my perspective. It's the, it's the adage that we as Black women, Black girls are not to the point that we're inhuman, but we're invaluable. Our excellence, our intellect, our ability. It's really a self-affirming. When you walk out consistently into a society that puts up stereotypes and archetypes, even that say how you are, how you were born, how you show up will not cut it. You then begin to kind of go inward and you grab a hold to all those wonderful things about yourself. Really, it's, this, again, my opinion, I think it's a survival technique. I think consistently affirming to yourself that I am awesome. It's kind of like, the help. You are smart. You are, you are beautiful, right? You are important. Affirming consistently. Now, the reason I don't use the word Black girl magic often, I mean, I have before, but I don't use it often because I am in a lot of mixed spaces. And there are times when that term gives the illusion of superhuman, of immortal, of you can do anything. And so as we talk about our awesomeness as Black women or Black girls, and our ability to do the supernatural, right? Because that, when you think about like I have a whole spiritual thing. I'm not gonna go there, but a whole spiritual thing on magic that it may not go well with this topic. But one thing we do know about magic is that it is the appearance of something miraculous. It's when people say magic, there's something grand that happens, and it tends to change an atmosphere. And so that's what I hear when I hear Black girl magic, that the presence and the persona, the excellence and the intellect that is shown when powerful, strong Black women and Black girls show up in their authenticity. That is magical, because there's so many places that oppresses us to the point where we feel like we can't show up in all of that. So.
That's good and very well said. Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't even want to touch on that too much. I will say, and I think LaQuisha is watching the show, but I'm not going to talk on that.
No, I promise you I'm not. So I have a big screen right here and a little screen, and then you told me to watch the phone. So I keep going like this.
You're good. You're good. I'm just laughing because of our conversation prior to this. But when you talk about the Black girl magic, I too do not say Black girl magic. I think I probably used the word Black girl magic in my hashtag today, probably for the second time ever, for the simple fact I was trying to make it show up a little bit more with the algorithm because of the topic we're going to talk about. So my whole thing, and I'm not going into that either, is kind of the spiritual thing. I don't like the idea of the word magic. However, I definitely agree with what you say. It's more of affirmation, empowerment type of thing. And so do what you do. So
when we think about magic, though, before we leave there, let's not leave this kind of lingering, because when we think about magic, sometimes when you push through, like take off whatever your belief system is around the word magic, when you push through a place, right? So Tupac referenced a rose that can grow through concrete, right? He wrote a whole set of poetry about it. That is a magical moment, and it's magical because it's a beautiful thing that comes out of a place that it doesn't look like it should be there. And that's what happens when I see women of color push through the barriers, the obstacles that have been set before, and show up in their authenticity with all the excellence that they exude. And that, that takes a whole lot. Like that is pretty magical. When you can actually show up and, battered, bruised, broken, but not bow down and not having thrown in a towel. So if that's what you call magic, then I'll call that magic, because that is what we do every day.
And
Well,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Michael. No, go ahead.
And that's just my thoughts on that. Aside from the spiritual aspect of magic, I think the term Black Girl Magic is used as a title. It's a title to define exactly who you are, exactly what you are, the things that you have survived. It's almost magical, like LaQuisha said, the things that you have been able to survive throughout history. When you look at individuals like Shirley Chisholm, and you look at Michelle Obama, you look at even I was watching Judas the Black Messiah the other day. You look at Fred Hampton's wife. These are Betty Shabazz. You look at individuals who were African-American women who survived some of the most tumultuous times in history. When you look at our great-great-great-grandmothers who were slaves, who were able to not just raise their children, but their master's children. That takes another level of discipline, another level of mental strength, another level of magic to be able to go through and survive those situations. So aside from the spiritual aspect, I think the term magical, as far as describing Black women, is warranted. I think that it should be something that should be worn. It's something that should be worn proudly and for what it is. So definitely, I think it is a deserved title.
I agree with that.
I think you did a great job in explaining Black Girl Magic. My turn. First of all, I just think it's an affirmation, and I think LaQuisha should use that word. When you are an oppressed people and your history has tried to hold you down, the only thing that has been in the media, in the history books have been negative, you have to sometime begin to do like David did in the scriptures. Sometimes you just got to encourage yourself. So I think that as a race of people, there are many times, I mean, you take the word Black power. People during my time had a real problem with that. We were just simply saying, since the history books and everything else around us has not given us any power or authority, we're going to place it upon ourselves as an affirmation to encourage ourselves. I think even Black Lives Matter becomes an affirmation and then there are a lot of people that take it as a negative. And I think I made the reference on last week. Many times Black folks say Black Lives Matter and others want to take it out of context. Maybe we should say Black Lives Matter too, because we're in a culture that has not made the Black lives relevant or important. So sometimes you have to encourage yourself. And that's what David says. He says, if you won't do it, I'll encourage myself. And as a race of people, we have been able to survive in spite of the obstacles that Jamichael shared, not because someone told us we were wonderful, because someone told us we were special, or we've had to tell it to ourselves. And so I think that that's what Black women have done down through the years. And you guys are magical. You guys are magical. You bear the weight of a tremendous history. And when Black men during slavery could not be men, could not look folk in the eye, could not walk on sidewalks, when they had to take stuff because of the racism, there were Black women who stood up for their men, who stood up for their families. So you guys are Black magic.
And let me just say this, because I thought about this as you guys were talking. It's important that we just rebrand the whole thing Black. Whenever you think about, even we're talking about Black magic, right? People always
girl magic.
Black magic is wrong, but white magic is supposed to be good in Disney, right? You hear people say, oh, it was a black lie, or oh, it was a little white lie. Everything that has to do with Black has always been magnified to be negative. Even when you think of licorice, Black licorice is terrible, right? In my opinion. But everything has always been looked upon as being negative when it has to do with Black. And so that's why it's important that we don't take the word black girl magic as anything negative, but we have to own that. You have to walk in proudly with that, because everything else that has been told to those who do not know their history or who have not been well diversed in it, they look at things dark as being negative, as being dirty, as, you know what I mean? So I think it's something that we should be proud of.
I love that. I love that, Jamaica. I know Carmen has some input on this.
Mhm.
Well, I wanted to just put a pin in something that Pastor Jordan said when he brought up Black Power. I always, because I'm a forever teacher. So that phrase was coined by Chattanoogan, Willie Papa Ricks, who now goes by Mukasa Dada. He was a part of SNCC. And he got on stage with Stokely Carmichael, and that's where the phrase was born. So I always have to point that out whenever somebody brings up power. But let's go and fast forward to what we were
That
talking
was good. I'm glad you said that.
what we were talking about with Black Girl Magic. So I'm probably the only person that's going to have a slightly different spin on this. And that's basically is now, are we also feeding into the strong Black woman archetype? And what I mean by that is that we are always seen as someone who survives regardless. And yeah, that may be true, but it's not fair to Black women to always have to be strong. So I understand where Black Girl Magic originated, and I appreciate it. And yes, it is an affirmation. But I think over time, it's kind of borderline on that, you know, our women have to be stronger. We can't be vulnerable. We can't be weak. We have to always show up and stand up for everyone. So I always, you know, it's kind of gotten to that point for me. And I may be the only one who feels that way, but oftentimes when it's used now, it's used because some woman overcame some drastic or some, you know, really, you know, extraordinary situation. It's not just because she's just a great woman and who's done some great things in her town, some kind of big, huge thing that she overcame, you know, no parents, raised herself, you know, built a whole school from scratch, cured cancer. Like, it's always this huge thing now. So I just, like I said, I kind of tether on that whole, is it feeding into that whole strong Black woman archetype that I don't think is fair to us as Black women.
I agree with that, Carmen. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think, you know, one of the things that popped in my mind as you were talking, and it's something we've talked about before, anyone who saw the movie Queen and Slim, there was, you know, whatever you feel about the movie, that's whatever, but there was a very powerful line in there, and you had the couple, African-American male and a African-American woman, sitting on the back of the truck, and they're eating after they, you know, they're running from the cops and all this stuff. And so she goes into this rant about how she's this super powerful lawyer, you know. And so at the end of her, you know, just kind of like biting his head off, she was like, and I'm Black excellence. And so he's like sitting there eating like a Crystal burger or something. And he looks up at her and he says, why as Black people do we feel the need to be excellent? Why can't we just be ourselves? And that line resonated with me, and it struck a chord with what Carmen just said, because, you know, I was taught, and I don't know if anybody else on here, but I remember being taught, you know, when I came into the professional arena, I was told that Black women were the mule. Literally, this was part of my onboarding at a certain place that Charmaine names, you know, but by people who were leading me, you know, trying to coach me or mentor me. They said Black women are the mules of the earth, and that we have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. And at 23 years old, I don't know that I really knew what to do with that. I didn't know if I was offended, if I should be scared, if I, you know, so I was really in that fight, flight, or freeze. I didn't know if I should like lash at this person who's saying it. And this was another African-American person who told me this. And so I've tried my best to do what Carmen said. You know, in the beginning, you start off feeling like you can put the world on your shoulders like Atlas and carry it around until you realize like that's not what I was built to do. But then we only get, you know, for the most part, we get accolades and appreciation when you do those superhuman things, when you rescue a whole city, you know, when you put a whole neighborhood on your back, when you go, but like just regular things, you know, you're still seeing gaps in community, even locally, where people are being recognized in the normal, what we consider the normal ways. There's still racially desegregated places in those appreciations and recognitions.
That's good. Thank you for that input. I love having guests on here when we have different perspectives. So I love that you brought up that whole aspect, Carmen, because a lot of times we get on these things and the people on here, everybody agrees, but then you have people who aren't really speaking or don't have a voice because they aren't on the platform who have differing opinions. And so I love when we're able to bring out different opinions and perspectives because it makes you think about different things, you know, and it makes you, once again, it exposes you to different thoughts. And so thank you for sharing that. Now let me ask you this, because we're talking about the Black girl magic and going off of what Carmen said. How do we feel about the part where it's strong Black man? Whenever you hear people say strong Black man instead of just Black man, I like to actually start with Carmen on that, since she has a perspective on the Black girl magic. What is your perspective on that?
So I don't hear a lot of people give our men that type of credit.
Really?
No, that's not the narrative that I often hear about our men. I know it to be true that our men are strong, that they are community minded, you know, family minded, all of those things. But do we hear Black men praised in that way? Not really. So I don't know if I hear that phrase as much, or that expectation of having to put strong in the title. It's just kind of implied because you are male.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my thought on it.
Yeah, I guess for me, when I think of being a strong Black man, it's not hanging my validation on anyone's opinion. Being strong to me is what I am. Being strong to me is what I've seen. It's my father, it's my grandfather, it's the men who have been in my life who've showed me what it means to be able to bear the world on your back and not complain about it. And if you do complain about it, know that once you're done, to continue to move, continue to build, continue to try to move forward. And so I feel like when you wait for people to validate you being a strong Black man, you show your weakness. And so, and I think in the context of what you're communicating is maybe being considered the strong Black man and giving the credit maybe in your home or by those that you share and sleep with. You know what I'm saying? I think a lot of times, even with as time has moved on, we've seen that women, just period, not just Black women, but just women, period, have been able to garner better jobs and better opportunities. And so when you do that, a lot of times you find women who are making more money than the husband. You find women who are having better jobs than the husband. And so in the home, when you're not appreciated and when that is thrown in your face, then you can find yourself being vulnerable and things like that. But I think to be a strong Black man, you first got to know who you are, what you represent. And for me, I know who I am. I know that I'm made in the image of God. I'm made in his image. And so therefore I am whatever he says I am. And so I think when you find yourself, like I said, hung up on the opinions of the outside world, you have to know who you are first. Otherwise, you can find yourself being torn down by the world that we live in today, for sure.
So DeJuan, somebody made a comment in the live comments, and they said that usually they say that Black men are trifling, and not that, you know, that unfortunately that's the narrative. And the strong ones definitely outnumber the trifling ones, and I think that goes hand in hand with what Jamichael's saying, because you have a narrative, you have a narrative, but it's an active narrative, y'all. Like, it's not just something that's in a book that we are taught in school. It's inbred and intertwined into those things in school. But then we see it all over social media. You see it, you know, coming out of, you know, media in general. And so I think it's important that we have this conversation around that negative stereotype, because to what Jamichael was saying, he was like, you know, a man who has, you know, a good job or paying his, you know, whatever, taking care of his family. That too is a narrative that has been spun, so that you have men who feel because your wife makes 2 or 3, and I'm taking this conversation completely left, but 2 or 3, you know, times your wage, you know, sometimes those men by external factors get seen as trifling or lazy or what, not equal, and all these things, not realizing that all of this is a bigger structure. What happened? Like, I'm not saying that it's a cakewalk for us as Black women, so please do not pin that on me. But I will say that as an African American woman in this country, that it has been, I've seen Black women be able to navigate, especially corporate circles, a lot easier than Black men. I've actually even seen moments where myself, and I don't know if anyone else on here has done this, where if I'm at a table with a Black man, especially early in my career, with Black men and predominantly white peers, I will step back. And I have to ask myself, why do I do that? Especially if I saw his masculinity being demeaned or diminished,
Yep.
and my expertise or whatever being regaled. There's actually a great book. It's called Shifting: The Double-Sided Lies of Black Women in America. And it talks, there's an entire book written on it, y'all. It talks about, as Black women, why do we feel this need almost intrinsically to show up in a protective role, especially when you're faced with another racial identity. And so I'm still doing that work. I'm not here to say that I have answers. I do want us to know that we need to start looking at these narratives when sometimes we're playing into them, and we're putting stress on men. My husband is my partner. We are equally yoked in every way. And so what God puts together, let no man put asunder. That means no man and his structures, no man and his systems of oppression. God has a way of doing things, and we need to keep that in mind when we're having conversations about that.
Well, I think Michael, as far as I'm concerned, explained, I was very proud of his answer, because one of the things that I know about not just Black men, but the Black race, we are a very resilient race. We have come up against so much oppression and we survived. I don't know, I can't prove it, but I don't believe any other race that could have stood what we have withstood and still be sane. And so I think you call it resilience. But as far as a man is concerned, I think, as I said, Michael hit it on the head. And this is what I've tried to teach young men that I've worked with in the gangs, those who did not have fathers, those that I've mentored, and definitely my own children and my own son. Know who you are. Do not allow anybody to tell you who you are. Do not allow anybody to define you. You were created in the image of God. And in the culture that we were raised in, the culture that our forefathers have been raised in, there were roles that were played to get us to this point. Some of the things that you young people are talking about as you're balancing careers and this competing women and men, there wasn't a whole lot of that going on in my younger days. It was survival. It was roles that people fell in that wasn't outside the home. So I think we've just got to understand who we are. And I think it was LaQuisha that talked about, she's still doing the work. It's a process. Life is a process. It's a journey. It is not a destination. But I tell you what, if you don't know who you are, this has been said a number of times. If you don't know where you've been, if you don't know where you are, if you don't know who you are, you've got a tough go to figure out where you're going. And I think that is why it is important that we learn to mentor. It is important that, as I said last time, that we learn to pass the baton. I mean, I may not be able to leave my children wealth. I may not be able to leave them a big insurance check. But if I should go to sleep today, I know one thing: they know who they are. They know that they are absolutely no better than anybody else. But you better believe they're as good as anybody else. And I think that from a male perspective, that's what was put in me. And that's what I'm trying to put into my children and grandchildren. And I think that's what legacy is.
That's a great response. Thank you, Daddy. And that means a lot to us, because it's a generational thing, it's a legacy thing, you know, for us to pass on down to our children. But I do want you to be working on that other insurance policy then. Talking about, you know, one thing.
You
Because we
forget
know
it.
this, let's be working on
You
that.
got your insurance for Valentine's Day.
Easy way out. Well, thank you for that. LaQuisha, don't do that. Don't do that. You just instigate. So I want to, let me make read a couple of these comments. Keisha said, and it's going back a little bit, in short, I sometimes use the phrase, she's talking about the strong Black man, because of what our men have to deal with when they leave home every day. It's more of a mental title because they have to face adversity in the public and then come home and be that strong Black man for their family. And the Black girl magic that we have keep us lifted up. And then Wynn said, I think we step back because we feel the struggle to shine. And she's referring to the comment LaQuisha made about sometimes being at the table and kind of backing up a little bit when there's a Black man who's not being valued as much as he should be at the table. And so I have a couple more because we're running out of time, but I do have 2 questions. And I want to ask this. The first question is going to be, what do you think the cost is of our children, our people not learning the history? For me, I believe that the cost is what we're seeing in a lot of ways right now when it comes to just not really finding their value, when it comes to certain things with crime rates and different things. I think that's all a part of the system of us not knowing who we are. So I want to talk about what's the cost. And then from there, I want to end it in talking about what are the benefits, what happens, what is the possibility when we do know who we are, when we do learn our history, when we do feel valued. So let's start about the cost of not knowing.
I believe the cost of not knowing is a self-esteem issue. I think when you don't know who you are, you'll accept whatever anybody labels you. And I think I know that if we do not do a better job of educating our young African-American boys, our young African-American girls of who they are, where they come from royalty. I believe a lot of times our young people think their story starts at slavery. And when you believe that your story starts at a low place, then you can't see yourself ever being higher. And so I think that it's important that we continue to do a better job of teaching our young people who they are, because when you know, it's something about knowing who you are. When you know who you are and what you're capable of doing, what you've been capable of doing, then you're able to set your goals higher. You can shoot higher. You can aim for things that your mother, your grandfather never thought that they'd be able to see. And I think that when we look at the young people now, when they're able to see that the president of the United States in past was a Black man, when they're able to see people who are doing amazing things, I believe that it just builds something about your self-esteem. It does something for you. And so I feel like not doing that and not teaching our young people who they are or educating them, then you're going to see a perpetual stigma and stereotype continue to go on for generations after generation after generation. And one of the things that irked me is that a lot of times when I look at the news, or when I look in the newspapers, or I look at all the headlines, most of the information that you see has to do negative connotations when it has to do with Black people. It's crime, it's low excelling grades and things, when we know that's really not the truth. If you really do the statistics and you do the digging, you will find that African Americans are excelling on a level like never before. I think some of the most individuals who are excelling the highest, even in their doctorates and getting their lawyers and becoming lawyers, are African American women. But if you're not taught that, then you think that there's nothing better for you. And so I feel like when you do not educate, then it's only going to perpetuate a lie. And so we got to do a better job.
And I think we saw a lot of that too when we were doing Stop the Madness, and we were taking them the kids on the Heritage Tour, where we were taking them around the country to different locations, allowing them to learn about their history, allowing them to learn about civil rights. We went to the Rosa Parks Museum. We went to Rosewood, Gainesville, Florida, where Rosewood took place. And we showed them the movie going down there. And then we went down there and they still had chains hanging off trees. And I remember just how emotional they would get. We took them to Carolina to the Slave Relic Museum and just allowed them to start seeing their history. And it was the first time that they had seen her, many of them, not all, but had seen that type of thing and had started learning about their history. And I mean, you should have saw these kids. They were emotional. And I mean, their whole attitude changed, you know, and even the parents were saying that they were different when they got back. But it comes from knowing, you know, what people sacrifice for you to be able to have some of the freedoms that you have now and some of the rights that you have now, even if things aren't where they should be. You know, as the human race and as a system and all of that, like Jamichael said, just knowing who you are and having that sense of validation within you and not having to get it from outside makes a huge difference. Did anybody else want to say anything on that? Okay. So we talked about a little bit of just the benefits. What are the possibilities when people are able? We talked about, you know, having, you know, increased self-esteem and confidence, but what are the possibilities that can happen and are out there when Black, white, Asian, like all of the races are able to come together and truly understand each other's culture, truly understand the history? What are the possibilities? What does that look like? And what are some tips or things that you can provide that can help start this story in this scenario?
Well, I think some good examples are when the movie Hidden Figures came out some years ago, and all of a sudden it, you know, sparked this whole interest in STEM. Little girls, little boys, all races and creeds were all of a sudden interested in how can I get to NASA and how can I have a career like that. So seeing those examples is what can unify us, as well as, you know, put that vision for the future for someone out there. So that's what history can do for you. And that's what learning about other cultures and other people's past can do for you. Because again, that movie, it was little Black girls, little white girls, little boys. They all of a sudden had this interest in learning about science and getting careers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember that. And I think maybe LaQuisha, you were there too. I think I saw you at the movie, but when that movie came out, a lot of several organizations came together and rented out the movie theater and took the children to see it. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that I feel like it takes, you know, if the parents aren't taking them for many reasons, sometimes they can't afford it. Sometimes they just don't take the time. Sometimes they're too busy and they're trying to make ends meet. I mean, for whatever reason. That's why it takes a village to raise a child. You know, by those organizations coming together, it ignited something in some of these girls, like you said.
Yeah, LaQuisha and I just one night was like, hey, we should figure out how to rent out the movie theater, and we made it.
That was yes, I was there too. I had one of them tickets. Thank you. That was awesome. That was awesome.
But you can remember and this is kind of dovetailing on what Carmen said. One of the things that we did after that movie was we actually brought in women from the city who work in what would be considered STEM careers. So that, because I think that's also one of the things that maybe doesn't happen as much. So yes, we'll get a Hidden Figures. We'll get a, you know, the movie that everybody's raving about right now about Fred Hampton and all of that. Like, that's cinematography, but that cinematography that was given to you. It's still a narrative. It's still, it may be true. It may be factual. It may make you feel great, but it's still a narrative. You have to seek it out yourself. If you are here in Chattanooga, if you don't know who Randolph Miller is, then you can't talk to me about Fred Hampton. I don't even want to hear about Fred Hampton, because you need to tell me about Randolph Miller. You live in Chattanooga, and if you're from Chattanooga, because I'm from Memphis. All right. So I can tell you about Robert Church, but I can tell you about Randolph Miller because I've been here 18 years. And so he was a Black pressman, right? He was a former enslaved man, Black pressman, came here to work for the Chattanooga Gazette under Adolph Ox, who was the founder of our newspaper. And so after he worked for him for so long as a pressman, he then opened his own, started his own newspaper called the Weekly Blade. If you don't know that the Weekly Blade existed in Chattanooga as an African-American person, like, these are things that but they didn't make no movie about Randolph Miller. They didn't make Jacob Cummings, another free man who, you know, basically freed himself from a plantation up near Moccasin Bend at night, coming down to Tennessee on a shanty to get to his freedom. To his freedom. But we don't have a movie about him. right? And so, and there's so many other unknown names. So I think for us, what we're missing right now, the cure for cancer, the cure, not a, the cure for COVID could be sitting in an Orchard Knob Elementary School, could be sitting in a Clifton Hills, could be sitting in a Hardy Elementary School. But is the system designed in a way that the resources are available so that the teachers are getting what they need and they're getting the proper education and educational support? The students have the proper resources to test these theories. Is the school structure set up to be conducive to all learning styles? We talk about differentiated learning. All of these things play into the fact the people who became the people that we know did so out of a place of innovation, and they had space to innovate. They had rooms. I would arguably say that Bill Gates would not be Bill Gates if he was not born when he was born, where he was born, and had access to what he had access to. Y'all should read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. That's another book reference. Y'all know I'm about the book reference. And so that's what you should read that, because there are several things that make up why things happen the way they happen. So the history part, the one, we have to know it. We have to know these things, because everything seems impossible until somebody makes it possible. And the reality is that everybody, like I think it was Jermichael said, or maybe it was Carmen, that maybe there's some missing links, right? Maybe the generation below, or my generation even, maybe there were some missing narratives that weren't connected, or some missing dots that weren't connected. And so we have to start filling in those gaps, but with factual information, not about slavery, not about even the fact that, everybody came from royalty, because everybody didn't come. There wasn't such thing as a serving class, okay? Your people might have been the serving class, but they might have been the top notch. That's why I think The Butler was a great movie, and that it showed the regal strength that it took to serve your nation, even in a moment of what some would see as subservient. There was a strength that we had, a resilience, as Pastor Jordan said. So there's just so much. I'm going to shut up. Go ahead.
And like Pastor Jordan said, the images you don't see are just as important as the images you do see. We did a whole exhibit about that from this ballerina in New York, and she did a series of photos of her in her full ballerina costume all over New Jersey, because she realized little Black girls didn't see images of her, like her, as a professional ballerina. They couldn't fathom that a Black woman could be a professional ballerina working for some of the major houses throughout the country. So she did a whole exhibition about it, because of those images you don't see are just as important as the ones you do see. So if I never see it, how can I visualize it? And if I'm not taught in school to think outside the box, if I'm only taught to test, which is happening with a lot of our kids, and I'm not taught to be exploratory or think outside the box or do these other things, or critical thinking and all these other tools that some of us were given, those inventors are lost. Those inventors are gone.
Yeah. DeJuan, you said something. I think your original question, your original question was, what happens when we begin to teach Black history on a wide scale, on a level to where everybody's getting it, right? So I think one of the greatest things I was able to do this past summer, even after the George Floyd incident, I was able to make some new relationships with a few guys from different churches who are actually white guys. And what I was able to get from them that time was, number one, was sympathy, but it was also more understanding. They were hungry to understand. They were hungry to learn. They were hungry to find out, what is the Black story? What is the Black narrative? How can you educate me on this? And while I did get a little tired of doing that, being the teacher after so long, but I realized how necessary it was. I realized that I couldn't get tired in that moment, because here we are, we've survived hundreds and hundreds of years of not being able to be heard. And now you have people who have turned their ear to listen to you. And I do believe that there's power in numbers, there's power in people. And I believe that when individuals are able to learn history, come together, I think we begin to push ourselves to the greatest goal, which is love. That's the ultimate goal, is love. And so I feel like when we're able to do that, then we're able to get to that goal, but we're also able to build. We just talked about Fred Hampton. One of the greatest things that I got from that movie was his ability to pull everybody together. Mm-hmm. And that's what made people nervous. It was not that Fred Hampton was talking about being Black. It's not that he was talking about civil rights. It was the fact that he was getting everyone together at the same time to fix a problem that plagues us all. The things that we see going on in the world today is not necessarily a Black problem. It's a human problem. And whenever someone can see themselves and see where they are in that problem, then you're able to band together and make a complete change, because the ultimate goal is love. It has nothing to do with Black. It has nothing to do with green, red, and white. Majority of the time, we know it has to do with that almighty green. But I feel like when we realize that we're better together, then we'll start to see what we've been dreaming about. We'll see the dream that King had. We'll see that real American dream.
Yeah, and even to Jamichael's point, I mean, throughout history, more recent history, even with the civil rights movement, it was people seeing those kids being hosed down is what started the change in the white community. And in more recent times, it's been people seeing those videos, those, cell phone videos. You could not deny what was going on, but it would be wonderful if people were taught to respect other cultures through learning about other cultures, period. So that's how you get to that level of respect. It shouldn't have to take somebody getting hosed down, somebody having a knee put on their neck. It shouldn't take that to form respect or want to learn about other cultures. It should just be inherent in you as a human.
That's good. That's good. I'm going to go, and we're going to get out of here, but I saw where Denise said knowledge of your history can raise you up, not knowing it can knock you down, and that is so true. Tyler said we know more about George Floyd now than Black history, and that is so true, and that just goes along with everything we just talked about, as far as like, what's placed in front of you, what the media is showing. Go ahead, LaQuisha.
So I agree with everything that everybody's saying. I think, we sometimes, one of the things that popped in my head was around this concept of what exists in I think Jamichael mentioned Dr. King. And just to I'm going to take a little snippet out of Dr. King's playbook, right? So Dr. King talked a lot about unity. He talked a lot about people coming together and banding together. But he also introduced a concept that basically got bastardized by the nation, and it was this concept of colorblindness. So, judged by the not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And so for the first time in our nation's history, we start to see things that were marked. Our society was marked. If you were white, you knew this was your water fountain. This is your restaurant. This is your, seat on the streetcars, on the buses. And so Dr. King comes in and he says, let's be together. Let's kind of band together and create this society that's not marked, this colorblind society. And a lot of people got there and they got frozen. And let me say what happens. The only thing that went unmarked were white people. Everything else stayed marked. We just took down the whites only signs. But we created laws, right? So for everything that you're taught in history, you got to go one step further and ask yourself what really is being presented. So yes, I believe too that in the beginning, the God of the universe created us all equal. America is not the universe. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, America not the world. America is where we live, okay? And so our laws were, every time there was something to level us and bring us closer to being with that original creation, we see some type of twist. And so I'm very careful when I hear people say, let's just come together. And because some of this, y'all, all of us, Black, white, Latinx, Hispanics, which Latinx and Hispanic aren't the same. If you don't know that, you should look that up, because those are not the same people. And so if we all come together, some say if everybody who is a self-professed racist were to be wiped off the face of the earth today, that we would still have racism for another 400 years. I.e., there would still be this need to talk about, because we have built and baked it. Racism is so interwoven into the fabric of American culture that to be deemed anti-racist is to be deemed unpatriotic. How in the world do I not love my country just because I want to say I value my culture? These two things aren't even connected. So we have to continue to dig for everything that you learn. I'm the kid that read the footnotes. I'm going to read the book that's in the footnotes of the book that I'm reading. because there's always something more.
Oh, that was good. That was so good. Thank you so much, you all. We're going to go ahead. We could talk about this all night. As a matter of fact, I saw where Dennis said in here, this needs to be a weekly thing. I don't think that's going to happen. However, we have provided many, many resources for you all to go and start researching. If you've already researched, go and read more. There are so many great resources out there, and they gave you enough between last week and this week to get you started and to take you deep into it. And once you start reading those books, they will tell you about other resources. And so it continues to build on the other. And so this is something that is so key, so important, not just for Black people, like we've said, to learn our history, but for everyone to take time. Be intentional about learning history. Be intentional about getting to know other people from other cultures. Be intentional about building relationships. That's the only way that you're going to know, because you can learn a lot from a book, but it's nothing like experience. Once again, whose narrative are you reading? So make sure that you're being intentional about learning. And before we go, I want everyone, I like to end the shows. I hate calling this a show. I like to end the lives with giving just a word of inspiration, encouragement, or something around the topic that we've been discussing tonight. So I'm going to start with LaQuisha because she's at the top.
Okay. I guess my word of inspiration would be don't grow weary. I'll start with my friends who identify as being white or Caucasian. This work can be daunting, learning about something that basically rips the Band-Aid off of your core foundations, especially here in our country. It can be overwhelming. I'll say to you, stay the task. One of the things I share with my friend, though, is don't come to the party if you don't plan on staying the whole time. So don't think that Black History Month and learning about African-American culture is an elective, is a prerequisite that's going to get you into somewhere else. This is a lifelong journey because it's about lives that are being lived, just like yours. And so I would say that to them. To those who call themselves African-American or Black from any part of the diaspora, I just say to you, keep hope alive. We are resilient people. There's so much that we have to offer. And to Jamichael's point, we are better together. So the more we can do together, the more we can work together, the better we're going to see this world be. God has not brought us to this point as a people, a humankind, as a race of people. He hasn't brought us to this place to leave us here. So there's still work for us to do. If we're on this side of heaven, we still got stuff to do, y'all. So don't get distracted.
Thank you. Carmen?
Well, just to piggyback kind of on what LaQuisha said, my African-American history teachers in both high school and college were white. So no one, owns the history, so to speak. We can all participate. We can all share the story. We can all be a part of educating each other. But don't get overwhelmed. There are tons of resources. There are tons of books that we've shared. But take your time with it. Try and learn and expand upon the things that you're researching at that time. Don't try and grab at everything at one time. Kind of break it down in chunks, because it's a lot out there. It is. But luckily, we live in a generation, we're in the digital age. So you have access like none other now to really, really be able to dig in and learn. So my thing is just, go out there, pick some subject, pick some name that you've heard, and try to learn a little bit more about them. And from there, it'll just keep rocking it on and on and on and on. But it's not exclusive to Black people or white people or Hispanic people. We all can learn from each other, and we all have something that benefits the other.
That's good. Thank you. Jamichael?
Basically just reiterating what everybody else said. Stay hopeful, stay resilient. Don't deny your future by being stuck in your trauma of your past. And basically meaning, yeah, we know the history where we've been, but we also know where we're going. And we know where we're going because we have the opportunity to create the future that we want to see. And I remain very encouraged by the young people that we see each and every day. It's so funny that we're up here talking about a lot of the past traumas, but a lot of them right now are banding together. They're best friends, and they don't know why we're talking about this. And I feel like if we miss the boat to get on the boat that they're on, we can find ourselves repeating the same narrative. So stay hopeful, stay encouraged, continue to educate yourself, just like Carmen and LaQuisha have said. Continue to be open to teaching others. And I think that's big. It's one thing to know it for yourself, but when you can educate someone else, then that's how we continue to spread this information of just how awesome African Americans are. And so just be hopeful and stay prayed up for sure.
Thank you. Pastor Jordan.
As I said last week, you guys keep me hopeful. I've been on this journey for quite some time. I've been disappointed along the way. Sometimes it seems like we're retreading old territory. I'm very hopeful for my children and my grandchildren. But as we have said tonight, remain hopeful. We must understand, and I don't know if I used the word ignorant last time, but I'm going to use it this time. Many people think that the word ignorant is a bad term. It means you're stupid. It does not mean. Ignorant means you do not know. And if you do not know, you are ignorant. But there is hope, because as this panelist said, you can study, you can research. We need to understand, and I can't say this enough, we are one race. We are one race. There is but one race, and that is the human race. I think LaQuisha did a great job of talking about how the black-skinned, dark-skinned, white-skinned people kind of came into this existence, but we're all from Adam and Eve. Eve was the mother of creation. And I think it's important, because of the way history has done and what has been left out of history, that we do have to go the extra mile to educate an oppressed group of people who have systemically and systematically been intentionally. And so we're talking about Black history tonight, but I want to remind you tomorrow night at 6:30 on our spiritual checkup, we're going to continue Black history. And we're not going to talk about Black history with the United States. We're going to talk about Black history from a biblical perspective, because Black history did not start in the United States. But Black history is biblical. When you talk, and tomorrow night, you're talking about Black, what was it? Black magic or Black girl magic?
Black girl magic.
Well, I'm going to talk about Black girl magic tomorrow night too, because I'm going to talk about Bathsheba. I'm going to talk about the queen, the queen of Sheba. I'm going to talk about the Black Madonna, and I am going to talk about Eve, and it's going to be biblical, and we will find that even those biblical characters were Black girl magic biblically.
Well, thank you for all of you who have shared. And once again, ditto to everybody. I won't give my spiel. I kind of gave it at the beginning, but just once again, just be intentional about learning. You cannot expect other people to learn your history and you're not being intentional about learning your own history. And so we will provide many resources. We have provided many resources. I see where Kristen in the chat said that she's volunteering to put all of these lists of resources together, recommendations. She really didn't. She recommended that I do it, but if she knows anything, she knows that I'm getting ready to recruit her. So we will together, we will put the resources together, and within the next couple days or so, and I will post all of the books and things that we've talked about so that you can have a reference and go back and look them up for yourself. Before we go, is there anything that you all have going on that you would like to share? Pastor Jordan shared his Facebook Bible study tomorrow. Anybody else?
I'll share. So I do racial equity trainings, Chattanooga and abroad, with my company. It's called Unlearn Everything and Live. We have several ways for people to opt in. We have a corporate training. It's about you can do it as 4 weeks or 7 weeks corporate training. It's called Where Do We Go From Here? We also have a more informal version. It's called the Unlearn Unity Circle. So if you have friends, family, your sorority sisters, your frat brothers, if y'all want to go through together I have a special rate for that. And you actually pay as an individual, and we'll schedule the times, and we can do a lesson. And I do everything from socialization to psychology, history, bias, all that kind of stuff in between. And then if you are a CEO on this call, I have another program. It's an executive coaching that I do for organizational and corporate CEOs. It's called A Leader to All. And so I support CEOs trying to help them navigate through the equity issues within their organizations. So I'll give a special discount if someone gets a group together. I'm going to bend my rule a little bit. I normally say a minimum of 5, but for this group, if you reference DeJuan's show, I will do a group of 4 with the 5th person being free. So that's the person who organizes this. You won't have to pay the fee. It's a small fee, y'all. It's $125. And what you're going to get is, and that's not me tooting my horn. That's just, I understand the value of knowing the information. So that's
she's going to give you great information.
So 125 a person, minimum of 4. If the organizer makes the 5th person, I'll give it to them for free. And we can set up a 4-week series. And we actually don't have to be 4 weeks. It can be 4 days. We can do it back to back and knock it out. All right. UnlearnEverythingAndLive.com.
Thank you. And do not take what she says lightly. I'm telling you. You do not want to miss the opportunity to take her training. Anybody else got anything going on?
Yes, you can follow my church ministry, the ministry that I lead, the Village Church. You can follow us online at on Instagram at The Village 2800, as well as Facebook, The Village Church 2800. And you can also follow my personal page at Jamichael D. Jordan. All of our sites, we continue to try to do ministry that is reaching not just the young people, but the community as a whole. The name of the church is The Village because we do believe it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that this topic tonight pretty much sums up exactly what we stand for outside of living for Christ, number one. So continue to follow us, support the ministry, and thank you for having me on your not your show, but your live tonight.
Thank you. And make sure you all go follow everybody that's on this platform tonight. LaQuisha, myself, I'm on Instagram at DeJuan S. Jordan. I'm on all platforms at DeJuan S. Jordan. Pastor Jordan, I'm not even gonna give you his Instagram. He don't even get on there, but it's TT Jordan. What is it? Senior SR. Anyway, he's not gonna see it anyway, but it's TT Jordan SR as a senior. And then anything you want to share, Carmen?
I don't have any programs happening at this time. So.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Carmen is busy dropping more resources in the chat. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you spending time with me these last 2 weeks. Make sure that you all follow up on my page in the next few days for those resources. Thank you for joining us, and you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you, DeJuan.
Thank you.